She was Hollywood's original it girl, wild, magnetic, and unstoppable. But behind the fame was a brutal childhood, public scandal, and a system that chewed her up and moved on. So, why did the world forget Clara Bow? Born into chaos. Clara Bow came into the world in 1905 in a cramped, crumbling room above a church in Brooklyn's Prospect Heights. It wasn't the kind of place anyone would call home. It was just where her family happened to be when her mother went into labor. The room didn't have heat. In the winter, the pipes would freeze, and in the summer, the walls held onto the heat like an oven. That's the place Clara entered, crying her way into a life already marked by loss and uncertainty. She wasn't the first child born to her parents, but she was the only one who made it. Her two older siblings had died before she was born. One passed away in infancy. The other, a toddler, died after accidentally setting herself on fire with a kitchen stove. Clara's mother, pregnant again after two tragedies, was fragile in every sense, physically, emotionally, and mentally. During childbirth, both she and Clara nearly died. No doctors were present, just a midwife and panic. Clara was a blue baby. She didn't cry and didn't breathe at first. For a few long seconds, her life seemed over before it began. Even after surviving that terrifying birth, nothing in Clara's early days promised a happy ending. Her mother, Sarah, had suffered a serious head injury years earlier after falling from a second-story window. Whether she fell or jumped was never clear, but what was certain was the damage. After the fall, Sarah changed. She experienced seizures, mood swings, and long periods of silence that would suddenly erupt into violent outbursts. Doctors later believed she had epilepsy and some form of untreated mental illness, but back then, no one had a name for it. People just said she was not right. Clara grew up walking on eggshells. Any noise, any wrong word, any small movement could spark something in her mother. Sometimes Sarah would stare blankly at a wall for hours. Other times she'd scream, tear her clothes, or throw things across the room. And in between those episodes, there were long, chilling silences that Clara didn't understand but never forgot. Her father, Robert Bow, didn't make things any better. He wasn't reliable or steady. He came and went without warning, disappearing for days at a time and returning with stories that didn't add up. He worked odd jobs as a janitor, waiter, and whatever he could find, but he never held anything for long. He claimed to be searching for stability, but most of the time he just wasn't around. When he was home, he didn't offer comfort or support. He was cold and detached, and there were rumors about how he behaved with young Clara that later followed him quietly through the years. With both parents either unstable or absent, Clara found herself raising herself from an early age. She didn't have toys. She didn't have books. Most days she didn't even have enough food. She'd rummage through the kitchen for stale bread or rotten apples and eat them just to keep from fainting. She learned how to do laundry, clean, and cook whatever scraps were lying around, all before the age of 8. Her clothes were hand-me-downs from neighborhood girls, often too big or patched at the knees. She never owned a new dress. The neighborhood wasn't forgiving either. Prospect Heights at the time was rough, filled with narrow alleyways, overcrowded apartments, and broken glass littering the sidewalks. Fights between neighbors were common. Police sirens echoed through the streets. Children grew up fast there, and Clara was no exception. She didn't have time to play or dream. Her main goal was survival. Stay out of her mother's way, keep her father from getting angry, stay quiet, stay invisible. School was no escape. Clara struggled to concentrate. She was often too hungry or too tired to follow lessons. Her teachers called her distracted. Some thought she was slow. But it wasn't that she couldn't learn. It was that her home life gave her no room to breathe. Still, she loved stories. She memorized bits of poems, recited them to herself while walking alone, and copied down lines from dime novels when she could get her hands on one. She didn't know it yet, but something inside her had already begun to resist. Something was trying to survive, to imagine something better. One of the only places Clara ever felt peace was at the movies. She'd sneak in when she could, sometimes with a nickel, sometimes through a side door. She'd sit in the dark, eyes wide, taking in the glowing faces on the screen. They weren't real, and she knew it, but they made her feel something close to hope. The women on screen wore clean dresses and spoke in ways Clara had never heard. They were confident, they were safe, and they always had a place to return to. Clara didn't have that. Her childhood was a chain of small disasters, all stacked on top of each other. Illness, death, poverty, silence, yelling, hunger. She never got a break. Every time something seemed to get better, something else fell apart. People didn't protect her, they forgot her, overlooked her, or used her. So she learned to expect nothing and to trust no one. Her mother became her first enemy. Her mother, Clara Bow, was unpredictable and unstable, and Clara never knew what version of her she was going to get. Clara suffered from epilepsy and likely some form of undiagnosed mental illness, worsened by a fall she had as a child. That fall left her with brain damage, and over time, her mental condition deteriorated. But what made things even more dangerous was that her rage was often focused entirely on Clara. From a young age, Clara was on the receiving end of her mother's jealousy. Sarah hated the way Clara looked, and it showed. Her daughter's beauty, youth, and growing independence triggered something dark in her. Clara wasn't allowed to laugh or smile too much. If she did, Sarah would accuse her of being vain or acting like a tramp. Any sign of confidence from Clara was treated as a threat. At home, things escalated quickly. Sarah's episodes weren't quiet or passive. She'd fly into violent outbursts without warning, sometimes smashing things, sometimes collapsing into sobs. Other times, she'd go silent, only to reappear moments later with wild eyes and shaking hands. Clara, still a teenager, had to physically restrain her own mother to keep her from hurting herself or hurting Clara. It wasn't an occasional event. It became a routine part of life. There was one night Clara never forgot. Sarah had been acting strangely all day, quieter than usual but tense, like something inside her was waiting to snap. When Clara went to sleep that night, she thought she was safe. But sometime in the early morning hours, she woke up to find her mother standing over her with a knife. Sarah pressed it against Clara's throat and whispered that she'd rather see her daughter dead than in motion pictures. Sarah was convinced that the film industry was evil and that it would corrupt Clara or destroy her completely. And if she couldn't stop her, then death was the only option she saw. Clara managed to get away, but the scar from that night was deeper than anything a blade could leave. The woman who was supposed to protect her had become someone she had to protect herself from. That kind of fear doesn't just fade, it gets baked into your bones. When Clara finally did begin to chase acting work, she didn't tell her mother. Every time she left the house for a screen test or audition, she told Sarah she was visiting a friend or running errands. She'd change clothes in public bathrooms and wash off makeup before coming home. She lived in constant fear that her mother would find out and try to stop her. And after that night with the knife, stop didn't mean a lecture or a fight. It meant real danger. In 1923, Sarah's condition got worse. She had been in and out of hospitals by then, but nothing seemed to help. That year, she collapsed and never recovered. Her death wasn't sudden, but it hit Clara like a train. At the funeral, she broke down completely. She screamed, she cried, she begged people to stop the burial. Then, as her mother's coffin was lowered into the ground, Clara tried to climb into the grave with it. People had to physically pull her away. Her grief wasn't simple. It was tangled with guilt, anger, and years of emotional trauma. She loved her mother, but her mother had also tried to destroy her. There was no clear line between victim and abuser in Clara's head, just a mess of memories, most of them painful. Even when she found some peace later on, she rarely spoke about Sarah. The few times she did, she'd say she didn't blame her. But those who knew Clara well said she carried that trauma with her forever. So, when Clara later entered Hollywood, she didn't walk in with confidence or protection. She walked in with scars. Her rise was immediate and rough. In the early 1920s, Motion Picture Magazine ran a nationwide fame and fortune competition. Clara, 16 years old with no training or connections, sent in her photo. She won. Her prize was a screen test. She got a few seconds of background screen time in a silent film called Beyond the Rainbow. She barely appeared, but it was enough to catch attention. Studios saw something in her. It wasn't technique or polish, it was a presence, and it was rare. Clara didn't fit the mold. She wasn't from money. She didn't speak with a practiced accent. She was loud, fast-talking, and straight out of Brooklyn. But she looked like no one else on screen. Her red hair, large eyes, and expressive face stood out in every frame. When the camera rolled, Clara didn't just act, she reacted. Her emotions came fast, raw, and real. She didn't hold back. The audience noticed, and so did the press. Clara didn't talk like the high society women who usually filled the screens. She sounded like the people sitting in the theater, and they loved her for it. Her Brooklyn accent made her feel accessible. Her look made her unforgettable. Her style caught on quickly. Her cropped bob became a national trend. Her henna-dyed hair flew off store shelves. Her lips, always painted in a heart shape, became one of the most copied makeup looks of the decade. Women called it putting on their Clara Bow. It wasn't just that she was famous, she was everywhere. Posters, billboards, fan magazines, beauty ads. You couldn't miss her. Even when she wasn't the lead, people walked out of theaters talking about her. She moved in a way that pulled your eye. Every look, every gesture had an impact. In silent films where actors had to express everything with no words, Clara dominated. Her face could shift emotions in a second. By the late 1920s, studios were giving her more and more roles. She became a leading lady almost overnight. She worked constantly, sometimes appearing in multiple films a year. There was no time to rest. Studios treated her like a machine. She delivered hits, and they kept her working. The pace was brutal. Clara never had formal training, and that made her different on set. She didn't like rehearsing. She preferred instinct. She wanted to feel her way through scenes. That frustrated some directors, but others saw what made her work. She could hit emotional peaks with no warning, making scenes feel unpredictable and alive. When she was locked in, the result was magic. She also had a natural ability to cry on command. She didn't need tricks or eye drops. The emotion was there, just under the surface. It didn't take much to bring it out. Her directors used it often, but this wasn't a skill she enjoyed. It came from a place of real pain, and people who saw her behind the scenes noticed how fragile she could be between takes. Her films made money. The audience loved her, but the system didn't protect her. There were no managers or coaches helping her navigate fame. She figured everything out as it happened. And with every new film, the pressure grew. More attention, more headlines, more opinions. The people in charge saw the profits, but not the person behind them. Clara wasn't interested in playing the Hollywood game off-screen. She didn't dress up for events unless she had to. She didn't fake smiles for reporters. She spoke her mind. That made her popular with fans, but harder to control for studios. She didn't follow the rules, and some executives didn't like that. Still, she kept going. Film after film, year after year. She was young, busy, and holding everything together on instinct. The spotlight gave her fame, but it came with non-stop pressure. She became the symbol of a new kind of woman, bold, free, and unfiltered. But the industry around her wasn't ready for someone it couldn't manage. She got roles, but at a cost. Back then, studios had complete control over casting. What ended up on the screen wasn't just about talent. It was about who said yes to what and who played the game the way the bosses liked it. For a young woman with no connections, no guidance, and no protection, this meant every role came with strings attached, ones you didn't always see until it was too late. Behind the scenes, it wasn't a secret that studio heads called all the shots. They picked favorites and made decisions behind closed doors. People talked. Whispers about how Clara got her roles followed her everywhere. Some said she charmed her way into scripts. Others claimed she was used by the very people who made her famous. The truth was harder to pin down because in that era, men at the top didn't need to explain their decisions, and women at the bottom didn't get to ask questions. No one really mentored Clara. There wasn't anyone guiding her or helping her make smart career choices. She didn't have someone to pull her aside and explain how to protect herself. She was young, untrained, and learning everything as she went. That made her vulnerable in a system that didn't look kindly on inexperience, unless it could be taken advantage of. Studio executives often mocked her in private, even while cashing in on her success. One called her a bird brain, while others said she had no acting skills at all. That was despite the fact that her films made huge profits. She was a box office draw, and audiences lined up to see her. But the people in charge didn't respect her. They didn't see her instinct as talent. They saw it as luck, and they talked about her like she didn't belong in the room. She had to deal with constant judgment, not just from studio heads but from other actresses too. In 1924, she was cast in a supporting role in Painted People, a film that also starred Colleen Moore, who was already an established name. Clara didn't like playing second fiddle and told Moore directly that she wanted her part. Moore didn't take that well. She went straight to the director and reportedly told him not to shoot any close-ups of Clara. In silent films, close-ups were everything. That's where an actress could connect with the audience. Without them, Clara's performance lost impact, and her chance to shine was cut short. That kind of sabotage wasn't unusual. The industry was competitive and unforgiving, especially for women. Everyone was fighting for attention, and few people shared the spotlight willingly. Clara's boldness rubbed people the wrong way, but it was also what made her stand out. She spoke her mind, even when it cost her, and it often did. She also had no control over how studios marketed her. They shaped her public image, sometimes without her approval. She was packaged as wild, carefree, and full of energy, which helped them sell tickets but made it harder for her to be taken seriously behind the scenes. That image followed her into business meetings, contract negotiations, and casting decisions. If she asked for something, she was difficult. If she pushed back, she was ungrateful. The same traits that made her a star were used to discredit her when she tried to take control. There was also a clear double standard. Male actors with bad tempers or strange habits were called artists. Clara, on the other hand, was labeled unstable or hard to manage. She had to deal with pressure from every direction: the camera, the public, and the studio. And because she came from poverty and had no industry family to fall back on, she couldn't afford to walk away. She had to take the roles they offered and deal with the treatment that came with them. People in the industry didn't respect where she came from either. She was from Brooklyn, had no formal education, and didn't come from wealth. That made her a target. She was treated like someone who should be grateful to be there, not someone who had earned her place. Even though she worked hard and delivered results, that didn't change how she was talked about in boardrooms or at studio lunches. The pressure didn't let up once she made it big. If anything, it got worse. More success meant more attention, and more attention meant more judgment. The people who cheered for her publicly sometimes turned on her privately. They said she was lucky, not talented. They said she was loud, not confident. They picked apart everything, from her voice to her looks to her behavior on set. It didn't matter how many tickets she sold or how many fan letters she got. Her career was always controlled by people who didn't take her seriously. She wasn't given space to grow or fail or experiment. She was expected to deliver and stay quiet. And even when she played by the rules still shifted against her. Studio heads used her when it suited them. They cast her, promoted her, and made money from her face. But they never saw her as one of their own. She was a product to them, something to sell, something to replace when the audience moved on. Her career kept growing, but the support she needed was never there. She became the first it girl. Then, in 1927, Clara Bow starred in a film called It. The story was light, but the effect was huge. She became the face of a new kind of Hollywood star, young, modern, and confident. The press called her the It Girl, and the label stuck. It didn't just refer to her character in the film, it became her identity both on and off the screen. She wasn't polished or distant like the actresses who came before her. She was energetic, expressive, and completely unfiltered. The audience loved that. Clara had something that couldn't be explained, but everyone felt it. She brought a spark to every scene and made it look effortless. She didn't try to be someone else. She brought her own voice, her own rhythm, her own charm. Clara's popularity exploded. Everywhere you turned, her face was on magazine covers, lipstick ads, and posters in store windows. Women copied her heart-shaped lips, her red bob, and her style. The shade of henna she used in her hair sold out across the country. Some women even said they were putting their Clara Bow on before going out. She became the blueprint for the flapper look: short hair, bold makeup, and a loud laugh that didn't ask for permission. Clara didn't just influence fashion. She also made her way into animation. Her wide eyes and cheeky expressions helped inspire Betty Boop, a cartoon character who carried the same playful energy. Clara's influence stretched far beyond movie theaters. She became part of daily life, even for people who never saw one of her films. But behind the fame, Clara was under pressure. Directors quickly learned that she could cry on cue. She didn't need eye drops or coaching. She could turn on the tears in seconds. That skill made her a director's dream, but it didn't come from acting tricks. Clara pulled from her real emotions. She had a lifetime of stress, anxiety, and loss that sat just under the surface. One of her directors, Frank Tuttle, said Clara was always full of nervous energy. She would pace, fidget, or talk to herself between takes. She didn't like rehearsals and didn't respond well to cold instructions, but when someone spoke to her clearly and directly, she delivered. Tuttle once said working with her was like playing a finely made instrument. If you touched the right string, the result was perfect. But it took care and attention. Clara was often misunderstood by people in the industry. Executives wanted her to be predictable and professional at all times, but Clara was sensitive, and her work depended on how she felt. That made her stand out as an actress, but it also made her a target. Some called her difficult. Others said she wasn't smart. None of that matched what audiences saw on screen. She brought honesty and emotion into every role, and it showed. Her schedule was packed. She worked on multiple films at once, sometimes filming scenes for one in the morning and another at night. There was no time to rest. Studio heads demanded more and more because she was making them money. Clara kept going, but the pressure built up. She was constantly surrounded by people, but she rarely had time to herself. Despite all of it, she kept performing. Her connection with the audience never broke. She didn't need fancy dialogue or dramatic monologues. One look, one glance, one word from Clara could tell you everything her character felt. That's what made her unforgettable. She gave the camera everything she had, her talent, her instincts, and the emotions she had learned to carry quietly her entire life. But the same qualities that made her famous also made her vulnerable to the demands of fame. The world saw her as a star, but behind the camera, her life remained complicated, fragile, and often lonely. Off-camera relationships got headlines. During the production of Wings in 1927, Clara started a relationship with her co-star, Gary Cooper. The two had immediate chemistry, and it spilled off-screen. The problem? Clara was already engaged to another man at the time. The industry buzzed about it, but Clara didn't seem to care. She wasn't interested in pretending. She liked who she liked, and that honesty made her both admired and judged. Cooper, who was still early in his career, was quiet and reserved off-camera, the opposite of Clara's fiery and emotional personality. But the contrast between them worked, at least for a while. Gary Cooper wasn't the only name linked to Clara during her early career. One of the most surprising relationships she had was with Bela Lugosi, the actor who would go on to become the iconic face of Dracula. Clara had seen Lugosi perform live on stage and showed up backstage afterward wearing nothing but a mink coat and a bathing suit underneath. That bold move got his attention. What followed was a short but intense affair that everyone in Hollywood seemed to know about. There were stories of late-night drives, secret notes, and extravagant gifts. Lugosi was reportedly obsessed with her. He even divorced his new wife just days into the marriage and ran straight back to Clara. The most lasting part of their relationship wasn't a breakup or a dramatic argument. It was a nude portrait Clara gave him. He hung it above his bed, and it stayed there for the rest of his life. Through 2 more marriages, different homes, and changing fame, that portrait never moved. Stories like these fed the tabloids. Gossip columns exaggerated and filled in the blanks with whatever they thought readers wanted to hear. The press didn't care what was true. All that mattered was that Clara Bow made headlines. Her relationships became public property. Each new rumor or sighting turned into a new article. And while some stars worked hard to keep their lives private, Clara's life was already too open to hide. Her honesty, confidence, and refusal to play nice made her an easy target. Studio executives weren't happy about the attention. They wanted their stars to appear controlled, graceful, and polished. Clara wasn't that. She spoke her mind. She dressed as she wanted. She dated who she wanted. She didn't fake smiles at events just to please photographers. In the 1920s, that was dangerous for a woman in her position. Men in Hollywood could get away with affairs and scandals. Women couldn't. Clara was held to a different standard, and her relationships were used against her. People began calling her reckless, unstable, and too wild for the industry. Directors and producers whispered behind her back, saying she brought chaos to their sets, even when she delivered unforgettable performances. Her work didn't protect her from judgment. The people in charge didn't just see her as an actress. They saw her as a problem they didn't want to manage anymore. What started as personal choices, who she dated, how she expressed herself, became a public image she couldn't shake. The name Clara Bow no longer just meant talent or fame. It meant gossip, scandal, and unpredictability. That reputation stuck. It followed her even when she tried to stay quiet or focus on work. She could deliver a perfect take, make a movie a box office hit, or bring in massive fan mail. None of it mattered if the morning papers ran a headline about who she was seen with the night before. By the time Clara was in her early 20s, the industry had already started to distance itself from her. She was still a star, but one with warning labels attached. Younger actresses were told not to follow her path. Studio heads started grooming safer, quieter stars to replace her. Clara hadn't done anything illegal. She hadn't broken any contracts, but she had done something Hollywood couldn't handle. She had lived on her own terms, and that, more than anything, made her a target. But just as the industry was turning its back on her, Hollywood itself was changing, and not in her favor. Talkies changed everything. When talkies took over Hollywood in the late 1920s, everything changed overnight. Studios were no longer looking for the girl with the most expressive face. They wanted the girl with the clearest voice. It wasn't just about looks anymore. Now, actors had to sound like upper-class professionals, preferably with clipped, polished tones that wouldn't offend audiences across the country. That didn't fit Clara. Her thick Brooklyn accent was unmissable. She never tried to hide it because in the silent era she didn't have to. But once microphones entered the picture, producers and directors started raising eyebrows. She spoke quickly, dropped her R sounds, and had the kind of streetwise voice that didn't match the new, refined image Hollywood was trying to build. Executives worried that audiences wouldn't take her seriously once they actually heard her talk. It was an instant mark against her. Clara wasn't shy about how she felt either. She didn't pretend to love the new system. She called talkies stiff and said they killed everything that made acting exciting. She once complained that sound films ruined her cuteness. To her, the natural spark, the thing that made her magnetic, got lost when she had to stand still and say lines into a microphone. She didn't like being told how to speak. She didn't like being boxed in. Technically, she struggled too. The equipment was still new and it wasn't actor-friendly. Back then, microphones were bulky and placed overhead just out of the camera's frame. They picked up even the smallest sounds, shuffling feet, rustling clothes, and background noise. To avoid picking up static or movement, actors had to stand still and talk directly in one direction, which made performances stiff and awkward. Clara couldn't stand it. She kept glancing up at the microphone while filming, ruining take after take. She wasn't trying to sabotage the scene. She just wasn't used to something floating above her head while she acted. In the silent days, she was free to move around, experiment, and be herself. Now she had to hit a mark and speak on cue without sounding too New York. It made her nervous and frustrated. The spontaneity she was known for didn't fit the technical demands of early sound stages. Still, despite all the warnings, critics, and awkward transitions, her early talkies performed well. Audiences didn't care about her accent the way the studios did. Her first sound film, The Wild Party, 1929, was a hit. People were curious about what she'd sound like, and once they heard her, many liked it. She sounded different, but that made her stand out even more. She didn't sound rehearsed, she sounded real. For a while, it seemed like she might beat the odds. Other silent film stars were disappearing fast, replaced by theater-trained actors with perfect diction. But Clara kept selling tickets. She wasn't flawless on mic, but people still showed up to see her. Her name was still pulling in money, and studios were happy to take it. But Hollywood was changing faster than it ever had before. Executives weren't just thinking about talent, they were thinking about image, tone, and the future of the industry. And in their eyes, Clara didn't fit that future. She was unpredictable. She wasn't formally trained. Her accent didn't match the direction they were going in. Even though the audience still liked her, the people behind the scenes started turning away. Directors complained that she needed too many retakes. Sound engineers said she didn't project properly. Publicists had a harder time selling her as a modern, respectable actress when she kept saying whatever was on her mind during interviews. She wasn't polished, and polish was now the new standard. The tension wore on her. She had always been anxious, but the pressure of adapting to talkies made it worse. She had to monitor every word she said, every movement she made, every sound she didn't mean to make. That constant pressure to perform perfectly without sounding too Brooklyn chipped away at her confidence. Even though she stayed in the spotlight for a few more years, the balance was shifting. Her charm hadn't disappeared. Her ability to hold a scene hadn't vanished. But the industry was no longer interested in her kind of star. They wanted people who fit into the mold, and Clara never did. The same spontaneity that made her a legend in silent films became a problem in the sound era. She had tried to adjust. She worked with coaches. She changed her acting style. She learned to stand still when speaking. But it wasn't enough, not for what Hollywood was turning into. The town that had once chased after her now wanted someone else. And just when she was struggling to hold on, the final blow didn't come from a director or a studio. Public scandal broke her career. By 1931, Clara Bow had lived through poverty, fame, betrayal, and heartbreak, but nothing prepared her for what was coming next. Clara had hired Daisy as someone she could rely on. In an industry where fake smiles and hidden motives were common, Clara needed someone loyal. Daisy handled her finances, managed her schedule, answered her phone calls, and was often present during her private moments. But things started to feel off. Money was disappearing. Bills weren't being paid. Clara may have been known for her emotional outbursts and impulsive choices, but she wasn't careless when it came to her income. She had made millions for the studios, and she wasn't about to let someone steal from her quietly. She decided to take Daisy to court. It wasn't a small matter. It became a full-on criminal trial. Clara accused Daisy of embezzling thousands of dollars from her. That meant every bank receipt, personal letter, and financial record had to be reviewed in public. The courtroom wasn't just filled with lawyers and judges. It was full of reporters ready to twist every word into a headline. The case could have stayed focused on money. But Daisy didn't go down quietly. Instead, she took the stand and pulled Clara's personal life into the spotlight. Daisy described Clara's romantic history in detail, naming names and throwing out intimate stories. She told the court about Clara's relationships with actors, directors, and powerful men in the studio system. She even went as far as mentioning things she'd seen in Clara's home, letters, photos, and notes never meant for public eyes. What should have been a legal battle over theft became a character assassination. Tabloids picked up every detail and ran wild with it. Some of what Daisy said may have been true. Much of it was exaggerated or completely made up, but that didn't matter. The damage was done. Journalists printed page after page of speculation, often ignoring facts and focusing only on scandal. Clara's name was no longer mentioned alongside box office records or fashion trends. Now it was paired with words like unhinged, unfit, and out of control. The court ultimately ruled in Clara's favor. Daisy was found guilty of grand theft, but Clara didn't walk away with peace of mind. The public had already made up their minds. Her reputation was torn apart by stories she didn't get the chance to defend. Her fan base shrank. Her offers slowed down. People who had once cheered for her in theaters now whispered about her behind her back. Studio executives, always watching the bottom line, saw the headlines and panicked. They had already begun to view Clara as unpredictable. She had a history of emotional breakdowns on set. She clashed with directors, and now with all this gossip dragging her name through the mud, they saw her as a liability. Even though her films were still profitable, they believed her personal drama would soon outweigh her box office value. Executives started to back away. Meetings were canceled. Contracts were stalled. Some of the people who had once fought to cast her were now the same people calling her a risk. They didn't want to be associated with someone whose name had become tabloid gold. The very industry she had carried on her back turned cold and corporate. Clara felt the shift immediately. She wasn't being offered leading roles anymore. The directors weren't returning her calls. She went from being everyone's first choice to being quietly removed from studio lineups. The isolation became louder than the rumors. With the pressure building and nowhere to turn, Clara asked to be released from her contract. She didn't want to continue pretending she was okay. Her mental health had already been fragile. Years of family trauma, toxic work environments, and emotional stress had built up. This scandal pushed her past the edge. At just 25 years old, she checked herself into a private sanatorium to recover. The facility was in Glendale, far from the bright lights of Hollywood Boulevard. There were no camera crews at the entrance, no red carpet, no applause, just quiet hallways and silence. For the first time in years, Clara wasn't acting. She wasn't performing. She was trying to rest. The scandal marked the end of her peak. Even though she was cleared in court, the court of public opinion had already made its ruling. Studios didn't forget headlines. Neither did the audience. Clara had gone from America's favorite flapper to a cautionary tale printed in ink. Her time at the top was over, not because she lacked talent or because audiences stopped caring, but because a single courtroom drama exposed just how cruel the business could be when you didn't play by its rules. She left Hollywood on her own terms. By 1932, Clara Bow had been through more than most stars twice her age. She had survived a traumatic childhood, a chaotic rise to fame, studio manipulation, media scandals, and the pressure of maintaining a public image that no longer matched how she felt inside. Hollywood wasn't a dream anymore. It had become a trap, and Clara was ready to walk away. That same year, she signed a 2-picture deal with Fox Film Corporation. But she wasn't doing it for a comeback or out of passion for acting. She was doing it for money, just enough to leave the industry for good. Clara made it clear she wasn't interested in fame anymore. The deal was strictly business. She completed her contractual obligations, collected her paycheck, and packed her bags. There were no goodbyes, no press conferences, no dramatic exits. She simply disappeared from the spotlight. She didn't disappear alone. That same year, Clara married cowboy actor and politician Rex Bell. He had a steady calmness that appealed to her, something far removed from the chaos she had lived through in Hollywood. They had met earlier, and their relationship had slowly grown, away from the front page. By the time they married, Clara was already determined to start a new chapter, and Rex was a big part of it. The wedding was small, not the spectacle people expected from the original It Girl. There were no reporters, no Hollywood stars, and no studio involvement. She chose to make that moment hers. After the wedding, Clara moved with Rex to his ranch near Searchlight, Nevada. It wasn't a glamorous estate or a private hilltop mansion overlooking Los Angeles. It was an actual working ranch, far removed from the industry that once devoured her life. The place had space, quiet, and enough distance from the city to feel like another world. That's exactly what Clara wanted. The ranch became her escape, her safe zone, and eventually, her permanent home. There, she tried to build something different. Clara and Rex had 2 sons. She shifted her focus to family life. The woman who had once been chased by reporters, stylists, and studio execs became a full-time mother and wife. She cooked meals, watched over her kids, and kept a tight circle. People who lived nearby knew who she was, but most respected her privacy. Clara didn't go out much, and when she did, it was usually with her family. She rarely took photos, gave no interviews, and avoided anything that felt like a return to public life. Rex stayed active in public service and politics. Clara supported him quietly, sometimes appearing at events, but always on her own terms. She didn't seek attention. She didn't try to recapture the fame she once had. That life felt like it belonged to someone else. Clara didn't even bring it up in conversations unless someone else mentioned it. It was like she had filed away her entire career and locked the drawer. The parties, the costumes, the cameras, they were over, and she didn't miss them. Clara also struggled with health issues throughout this time. Years of emotional stress, sleep problems, and dependency on various medications had taken a toll. She didn't talk about it publicly. There were no statements, no interviews about her past, and no memoir to explain it all. She stayed silent. Even close friends said she rarely opened up about what Hollywood had done to her. It wasn't bitter, it was more like detachment. She had moved on. Despite that, she never truly got closure. Hollywood never reached back out. There was no formal recognition for what she had done for the industry. The studios that once built their profits on her name cut ties completely. Her photos stopped appearing in fan magazines. Her name faded from articles about the Golden Age. No tributes, no award ceremonies, no honorary plaques. Just silence. Clara didn't fight it. She didn't ask for her spotlight back. She didn't call attention to the erasure or try to correct the narrative. She accepted the quiet even when it became isolated. Over time, she avoided crowds and large gatherings. She developed deep anxiety and rarely left the ranch. Eventually, she moved into a separate bungalow on the property and limited contact even with family. It was a slow withdrawal from a world that had once applauded her every move. Still, she had moments of light. Friends said she enjoyed watching movies in private, sometimes laughing at old silent reels from her early days. She didn't hate the work she had done. She just couldn't face the machine behind it. The system that pushed her into the spotlight and then discarded her when the spotlight moved on had left a mark she couldn't shake. By the 1950s, she was mostly forgotten by the public. New stars had taken her place, and her films were harder to find. But Clara wasn't trying to be remembered. She had already chosen a different life, one without scripts, directors, or headlines, a life where she could be Clara, not a product, not a performer, just a person. For a while, it seemed the world was content to let her fade, but history has a way of circling back to those it once overlooked. Her legacy was ignored, then resurrected. In 1999, when the American Film Institute released its highly publicized list 100 Years, 100 Stars, meant to honor the most iconic actors of the 20th century, Clara wasn't on it. The list featured legends from all eras, including several who had appeared in far fewer films or had far less cultural influence than she did. But Clara was absent, no mention, no recognition. To many fans of silent cinema, it felt like a slap in the face. The exclusion wasn't a one-time oversight. In 1968, film historian Kevin Brownlow published a groundbreaking book on silent film called The Parades Gone By. It was over 600 pages long and packed with profiles, stories, and analysis of the biggest names from the silent era. Clara Bow, who had starred in over 40 silent films and was once the highest-paid actress in Hollywood, didn't get a single chapter. She wasn't mentioned in the index, not even a passing reference. It was as if she never existed. Brownlow's book was considered the definitive text on the silent era. For many film students, critics, and casual readers, it became the foundation for how they understood early Hollywood. Leaving Clara out of that book meant that a whole generation of readers would never learn about her. It erased her from the official story of Hollywood's golden age. And because Brownlow was widely respected, few people questioned it at the time. They just accepted that Clara must not have mattered. The damage was quiet, but it stuck. Not everyone stayed silent. One person who noticed the omission immediately was Louise Brooks, another iconic actress from the silent era. Brooks had her own complicated relationship with Hollywood and didn't shy away from speaking out. When she read The Parades Gone By, she was shocked that Brownlow had given her an entire chapter while ignoring Clara Bow entirely. Brooks wrote him a direct and critical letter saying, "You brush off Clara Bow for some old nothing like me." She didn't try to be polite. She called the exclusion what it was, shameful. Her letter worked. Brownlow took the criticism seriously. It forced him to reconsider Clara's place in film history. He later admitted that he had made a mistake by leaving her out. More importantly, he corrected it. In his next project, a television documentary series about the silent era, he featured Clara Bow in her own dedicated segment. He showed clips from her films, discussed her career, and treated her with the same respect he had previously reserved for male actors and so-called serious actresses. For the first time in decades, Clara Bow was being talked about not as a tabloid figure or a forgotten starlet, but as a major player in early Hollywood. The documentary didn't just bring her back into public awareness. It introduced her to a whole new audience. Film buffs who had grown up never hearing her name suddenly wanted to see her work. Fans began to search for her films, most of which had never been shown on television or released on home video. Some of her movies were restored, re-released, and screened at film festivals. Critics started writing about her again. Articles popped up in newspapers and magazines, analyzing her acting style, her influence on fashion, and her impact on pop culture. She wasn't just a curiosity anymore. She was history. Online forums and early fan websites also played a part. As more people discovered her story, they began to share it. Websites uploaded rare clips and photos. Collectors traded old press books and lobby cards. Discussions about her work and her legacy began to grow. Young people who had never seen a silent film were now watching it in Wings and posting about how fresh and modern they felt on screen. Her performances, once dismissed as simple or shallow, were being re-evaluated as raw, honest, and deeply emotional. Even fashion historians got involved. They pointed out how Clara's signature look, arched eyebrows, dark lips, and short curls, helped define the flapper image of the 1920s. They noted how brands used her image in advertising and how millions of women mimicked her style. Clara wasn't just part of film history, she was part of American culture, and people were finally seeing that. Her influence also resurfaced in modern media. Characters in TV shows and films were styled to resemble her. Betty Boop, who had been based partly on Clara's appearance, regained popularity in merchandise and animation retrospectives. Musicians and fashion designers cited her as inspiration. Her face started showing up in editorials again, not as a forgotten footnote, but as an icon. It wasn't just about recognition, it was about corrections. Clara had been written out of the narrative for years, not because she lacked talent or success, but because she didn't fit the mold that male historians and industry gatekeepers preferred. She was too messy, too real, too emotional. But when people finally took the time to look at her work without bias, they saw what her fans had always known. Clara Bow was a star. And not just any star, she helped build the foundation of American cinema. Her films now live in archives, film libraries, and streaming platforms. Her image, once smeared by gossip columns, is now preserved by curators and historians. Her name, once missing from every important list, is now being added to syllabi, retrospectives, and museum exhibitions. People remember her not just as a personality, but as an artist. Her comeback didn't happen on screen, but it happened, and it stayed. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments down below.